Hi friends, today I'm going to show you how I make and can chicken stock and chicken bone broth, and you can use this for any meat broth or bone broth. For this recipe I'm going to be using about 5 pounds of chicken, and I just use chicken legs, about 8 carrots, 3 onions, and about 5 stalks of celery. You don't need to chop anything up. I do chop the onions up, but other than that, just leave the carrots and celery whole. I prefer to use organic if I'm going to go to the trouble of making and canning broths. This is going to be a roasted chicken broth. You don't have to roast it. Roasting it will give it a darker, richer taste and color. I do a little bit of both every year, but this is going to be a roasted chicken broth. So just add your chicken legs, and then sprinkle them with some pepper and olive oil, and I use my hands to kind of just smear the olive oil and pepper, make sure it gets all over everything. If that makes you a little squeamish, you can toss it with spoons or forks or however you want to do it. I prefer just get my hands in there. Once I've got everything coated with olive oil, I'm going to roast it at 450 degrees for about half hour, just until everything's nice and brown and some of those good fats and juices are rendered. In the meantime, I have filled my crock pots almost up with water, and I'm going to turn my slow cooker to low and cook it for 24 hours. At the end of 24 hours, I'm going to strain out all the solids. I like to use everything as much as possible, so I'm going to strain this liquid out and refrigerate it to let the fat rise to the top. In the meantime, I am going to take the meat off of the bones and use those to make just little dog treats for my dog, and I'm going to put the bones back in my crock pot with some water and some vinegar to make bone broth. So here I'm just going to separate that all out. Onions are not good for dogs, so keep the onions out of the mix for your dogs. The carrots are fine, the chicken is fine. I'm not a vet, but I've talked to a vet. I keep just a stash of bones in my freezer as we cook things, so I add all my bones to my bone broth, just with enough water to cover and 1/4 cup of cider vinegar, which will help leach out the calcium in the bones. So I'm just, I had very little fat rendered from this stock. So while that's all happening, you're going to sterilize your jars. So I put my jars in my canner, fill the jars halfway with water, and put them in the canner with water and bring those to a simmer, and I bring my broth to a simmer as well. And while all that's simmering, I am going to lay out all my canning supplies. And I don't mention, but this funnel has a mesh insert that helps keep the solids out. A little vinegar helps me keep the rims clean, make sure that the lids seal. So once your jars have simmered, you take one jar at a time, dump the hot water in your sink, and using your funnel, fill up your jars. And once again, this has a mesh liner, which helps any solids, prevents solids from getting into my stock. So everything is hot. The stock's hot, the jars are hot, and the lids are hot. They've just been put in hot water, which I had boiled. I don't boil the lids, so to speak, but I put the lids in a jar and then boil just boiled water over them. I'm going to fill the jars to 1 inch below the top, and I use my headspace gauge to determine that. So that's it, 1 inch. And so I'm going to wipe the jars with the white vinegar, the jar rims, which is going to help the lids to make sure there's no grease or broth on it that might prevent the lids from sealing. I'm using my magnetic lid lifter. I'm going to pick up one, lay that on, make sure that it covers the lid, and then screw on one of the bands. And they say fingertip tight. You just, fingertip tight means you don't like get your palm in there to turn it. You just tighten it with your fingertips. And then I'm going to put this in my canner that is simmering. And I'm going to grab another jar, dump that water in the sink, and just repeat the process. I have recently purchased a double canner, or I guess it's a 23 quart canner. Previously I had a 16 quart canner. The 23 quart canner lets me do 2 levels of jars, quarts on the bottom and pints on the top, or 2 layers of pints, and it really is a time saver. Canning isn't hard, but it can be time consuming, and being able to double my capacity with the 23 quart made a huge difference. Testing make sure I have that 1-inch headspace, which is critically important for making sure that your jars seal. Wiping it with the vinegar, and I don't mind getting a little vinegar in my broth. Just a matter of repeating that process till you fill all your jars. If your last jar you can't fill it up to 1-inch headspace, then just put a lid on that one and put it in your fridge. Do not try to don't try to can one where you don't have the appropriate headspace. Like I said, I typically can my bone broth alongside, and if I'm a little short on a stock, I'll add some of the bone broth to it. But in this case, all my bone broth went to my pup. So like I said, I can do 2 layers. So I have a mixture of pints and quarts in the first layer, and you can process pints at a quart for as long as quarts do. I'm going to put my lid on, make sure it's snug. And turn it on medium high, and let the steam come out of that vent in a steady, strong stream for 10 minutes. So set your timer for 10 minutes. And here's what it'll sound like when that steam is vented. But once you get a steady, strong stream, set your timer for 10 minutes. At the end of 10 minutes, you're going to put your vent cap over your vent and start watching your gauge. And you want your pressure to rise to 10 pounds. And I'm going to speed this up a little to get it up to 10 pounds. When it gets about a degree or two, a pound or two before the 10, so at about 8 pounds, I start slowly ratcheting the heat back. Makes it easier to control. You don't want to overshoot that 10, and if you let it get too hot, it's harder to ratchet it back. So just you want to ease into that 10 pounds. You're just going to have to watch. Now, we process these quarts for 25 minutes. So for 25 minutes, you need to kind of stay around in your kitchen and just be monitoring that gauge. You might have to nudge it up and nudge it back, just the smallest of little increments to keep it right around 10 pounds. If you drop below 10 pounds, you need to start your timer again for 25 minutes. Once again, 25 minutes for quarts and 20 minutes for pints. There are pints in here, but you can process pints at a quart. At the end of 25 minutes, turn your canner off and let it return to zero naturally. I have found when I've brought something to 10 pounds, it takes about 25-30 minutes to go back to zero. You will know it goes back to zero because your lid lock will pop down. And you can't see the lid lock in this picture, it's behind the gauge, but it is when your lid locks from the pressure. And when that drops back down to zero, you know that the pressure has returned to zero. Don't just use the gauge to tell you that your pressure is at zero. So wait 2 more minutes after your pressure has returned to zero, and then remove the weight from your vent cap. Take your lid off and do it away so that the steam goes away from you, and then let these jars sit in your canner for another 10 minutes. And during this time, hopefully you're going to start hearing the pings and pops as the jars seal. After 10 minutes, use your jar lifter to carefully remove the jars from the canner, holding them as upright as possible. All your jars might not have sealed while they are in the canner. Some hopefully will continue to seal while they're sitting on the rack. If they don't seal, but when you can tell that little dimple is down, then you need to either reprocess them or refrigerate them. But all the ones that have sealed are safe for your pantry. Thanks so much for spending a few minutes of your time with me today. I hope this was helpful to you. Don't forget, there's a full post with the recipe and written out instructions that you can see on the post. And you can go to that post by clicking the little I in the upper right hand corner. If you want to see more videos as we produce them, you can click the little nest in the bottom right hand corner. And if you have any questions, please comment below and I will be back in to check. And there will also be a full equipment list below as well. Have a great day.